patriots, yes, they rob and sold out to the merchant shelves. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, my head was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs.
Hey, what's up, troops? Jeff Evely, Ops Sgt-Maj with Veterans for Freedom, back with you now on this 19th day of July, 2023. We got all the regulars with us here this morning. I'll go ahead and say my good mornings. Century 2020 over on YouTube is giving us the triple slashy right back at you. Daryl, our most based of all V4F members, is here saying, hey, everyone from YouTube. What's going on? Daryl, you're over there on YouTube instead of, I think you're usually on Facebook, right? And don't forget, guys, I will have to sign off of YouTube near the end of the program here when we talk about all of the sciencey science. Anyway, here's Darlene saying, morning all, watching from New Brunswick. As always, thanks for being with us, Darlene. And Shannon is here saying, my favorite way to start the day. Morning, friends. Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate that. And Daryl is on Facebook as well, saying, hey, everybody. Right on. And Susan is here, and Susan is always here, which is awesome. And she says, Happy hump day, Jeff and friends. Happy hump day right back at you. Doings is here saying good morning to Daryl, and I imagine the rest of us as well. Thanks for being with us, man. And Karen is saying morning. Mike's here too. Okay, right on. Well, hello, Karen and Mike. Appreciate you being with us. Jane is saying hello, everyone. Greetings from PEI. Yeah, I was just tracking a friend of ours from the program here, one of our V4F members. Traveling through PEI. Man, I got to get over there for a visit at some point. You know, I grew up on the East Coast and I retired here, Cape Breton Island, and somehow I've never been to PEI. So be nice to do a motorcycle trip out there. I think I was just talking to one of my veteran bros that I served with for a number of years, and he retired to his home of PEI. And I'm thinking a motorcycle trip will be in our future here at some point. Metzislav is saying, good morning from Toronto. Metzislav, thanks for being with us, brother. I know you're always here, but that's great. And Colleen is saying, good morning, folks. Cindy, our most faithful of all watchers, is saying, good morning, Jeff. Hearts, good morning, friends. And smiley face, hearts and smiley face right back at you. Darlene, my favorite boomer, is out here saying, hello, hello, hello. Good morning, my brother. Waiting for another good show, bro. I appreciate you. And let me see. Leanne is here saying, good morning, Jeff and friends from Merrickville, Ontario. Oh, that's right. You're in Merrickville. I actually, I really like Merrickville. I think I said this before, but yeah, I did 7 years in Ottawa, and I would say that the motorcycle riding there in Ontario is its only redeeming quality. I don't call it Ontario for nothing, but Merrickville is just a beautiful little town. And that was the thing about Ottawa, is it was kind of like I could just point the motorcycle in any direction on any given day, with no intent on arriving anywhere. And I would probably just hit this pretty little town with all these historic buildings. And Merrickville, I think, was probably the prettiest. I really liked going down there. Lots of little shops and stuff like that on the main street, and some really cool old buildings. And they have the locks there for the Rideau Canal, because it goes way down. So it was a great spot. So Colleen is saying good morning, everyone, and Cora is saying good morning, everyone. Beautiful day here in Alberta. Thanks for being with us so early, Westerners. And okay, I think I'll go ahead and dive into this now. Let's have a look at our philosophy quote for the day. This is Immanuel Kant. Not a big fan of Kant myself, with the utilitarian crap that tends to lend itself very well to the commie BS that we're dealing with right now. Utilitarianism, essentially, greatest good for the greatest number of people. So yeah, cannibalism. But you know, he's got a lot of good stuff as well, I guess, some good quotes at least. And here he is. He says, "If the truth shall kill them, let them die." So that's where our title comes from for today. Let them die, as in D.I.E, diversity, inclusion, equity. Because I think that's pretty much the strategy that we're having to suffer under right now. So more on that as we go. And here is our meme for the day. And we have a picture of a guy wearing a mask. I mean, double masked, basically. He's got the mask and the face shield, and he's got a little like tag on his shoulder here that says Vax ID 6018. And he's looking at a book that says Germany 1933 to 1945, and he's thinking, how could people allow it to get to that point? Yeah, no kidding. There's a kind of willful blindness, I think, out there. A lot of folks that are still asleep. It's basically what Orwell said. It's, you know, they love Big Brother. They love this state. They put the state in the place of God. And that's what happens at the end of 1984. That's basically the last line in the book, is that Winston, the main protagonist, he loves Big Brother. So you start talking smack about the state, and people just get completely hysterical because you're essentially blaspheming their religion. And that's what the mask is all about. It's that face burqa to show your fealty to the regime, blood sacrifice in addition to that with the so-called vaccine. So That's where we are right now. It's essentially an Orwellian nightmare, and yeah, I don't think the slide is necessarily continuing. Like I'm always saying, we're in a fourth turning. A fourth turning is the crisis era that we enter into every 4 generations. World War II, American Civil War, American Revolution, Salem witch trials. It has a beginning and an end. Every one of these crisis eras has the potential for us to fall to tyranny or to usher in the next stage of the Enlightenment. The Salem witch trials would be an example of us falling to tyranny, whereas post World War II would be ushering in the next era of the Enlightenment. And yeah, so it is. It has a beginning and an end. And the thing about guys like Orwell and Huxley is they were observing the trends in their own societies at the time that they were living through, and they were forecasting basically, if these trends continue into the future, then this is what it's going to look like. And that's why Orwell wrote 1984. It was originally 1980 because he wrote the book in 1930. And it didn't get to publish. It didn't get to be published until 1934. So it was supposed to be 50 years hence. So he changed it to 1984. But the thing is that they went into the Second World War, and then there was the demographic shift that is required to end the fourth turning, which is when the nomad generational archetype displaces the prophet generational archetype from peak institutional power. Back then it would have been the lost generation displacing the missionary generation from peak institutional power. So Truman took the presidency from FDR and fired all those dusty old generals, missionary generation generals, put in the lost generation generals like General George Patton to lead the Allies to victory in Europe. And then the GI generation came back to North America and poured more steel and concrete than any generation before them or any generation since, and essentially gave us all the technology that we enjoy today. That's really only gotten refined since then, but there's, conceptually speaking, there's not really any new technology on the scene. So yeah, it has a beginning, it has an end. Orwell and Huxley, they failed to account for the cyclical nature of history. That's what we see, is this cycle repeating over and over again. Or as Mark Twain said, history may not repeat, but it sure does rhyme. Well, that's where we are. It's rhyming. So here's Forbes. This is the creeping tyranny. Not so creeping anymore. It's pretty in your face, but this is Forbes reporting Trump expects to be arrested over January 6th. So he did make some Truth Social post. I think I made an account on Truth Social there a while back, but I haven't really checked on it in a while. So yeah, I mean, it's lawfare against the one boomer who broke ranks with his generation earlier than any other. I mean, we see many others coming forward now, like Dr. Peter McCullough and so on and so forth, since this crisis really ramped up. But yeah, he broke ranks with his own generation and started sticking up for the other generations. And of course, he's been a pariah ever since, and they're coming after him with they call him every name in the book, of course. The guy with the black supermodel girlfriend in the 1990s is the worst racist in the history of the world, and he's literally Hitler and all this crap. And anyway, so now they're coming after him with a lawfare. It's been one indictment after another. They got to go after these indictments, so he can't run in the 2024 presidential election. And he is ahead of Biden in the polls as it is right now. So they're freaking out and the system is convulsing. Not that that's anything new. Okay, so here's the article. Top line. Former President Donald Trump claims he received a letter Sunday from Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith notifying him that he is a quote-unquote target in the agency's investigation of the January 6 Capitol riots, indicating he could soon face his third round of charges since leaving office. Yeah, I guess it was a riot, but for the most part, I watched it real time, and those people were let into the Capitol by Capitol Police, invited in. They stayed between the velvet ropes taking pictures as they did the great wandering through the Capitol, and then they arrested those people. And they shot Ashley Babbitt, who was shot and killed Ashley Babbitt, who was a 14 year veteran of the United States Air Force. So, and we still don't know why. We still don't know who did it. Okay, so here we go. Key facts. Trump said in a Tuesday post on the Truth Social app, Smith gave him 4 days to appear before a grand jury weighing the Justice Department's evidence against him and considering whether to bring charges. Trump predicted Smith's request for him to appear before the grand jury, quote, almost always means an arrest and indictment, close quote. He wrote in the statement, calling the letter, quote, horrifying news, close quote. Federal prosecutors have not indicated whether the plan on charging Trump in the January 6th probe or publicly confirmed the target letter, although ABC News reported the letter was sent, and it remains unclear what charges Trump could face. Charges in the Justice Department's January 6th probe would mark the second federal indictment Smith's office has filed against Trump following criminal charges against him for allegedly mishandling classified documents. And that was a farce, of course, because he was the president who took his own documents, and the president, even if he just does it in his own mind without saying it out loud, can declassify documents under the Presidential Records Act. So, okay, chief critic. Trump repeated his narrative that the probe was a partisan effort to aid President Joe Biden's reelection changes and said that with the letter, the Justice Department has, quote, effectively issued a third indictment and arrest of Joe Biden's number one political opponent, who is largely dominating him in the race for the presidency, close quote. Key background. The former president pleaded not guilty in June to 37 federal felony counts alleging he mishandled classified documents after leaving office. He also pleaded not guilty to 34 felony accounts of falsifying business records in Manhattan criminal court in April in a separate case related to an alleged hush money scheme prosecutors say he orchestrated to hide affair allegations ahead of the 2016 presidential election. That was Stormy Daniels. Smith's probe into Trump's role in January 6 Capitol riots centers around whether he attempted to overturn results of the 2020 presidential election and incited his supporters to break into the Capitol. Smith's office has interviewed an array of witnesses in the case, including former Vice President Mike Pence, who Trump supporters pressured to resist certifying the Electoral College results in the 2020 election, along with his daughter, Ivanka Trump, and son-in-law, Jared Kushner. What to watch for? The district attorney's office in Fulton County, Georgia, is also investigating Trump's role in efforts to overturn election results in the state. A grand jury was convened earlier this month to examine the evidence against him after a separate special purpose grand jury interviewed more than 75 witnesses and published a report that suggests charges, including perjury, could be merited. Trump on Monday lost his bid to toss out the evidence against him in the Fulton County case when the state's Supreme Court dismissed his attempts to essentially shut down the probe. And okay, so that's where we are there. Thank you, Forbes. Okay, no, I'm not going to sign up for your subscription. Here's Scott Adams. He is the author of Dilbert, the cartoon. He's a pretty interesting guy. He's really into self-hypnosis. I read one of his books on that one time. It's a really neat thing. If you're into meditation and stuff like that, you should probably maybe check some of that out. It's like meditation on steroids, basically. But this is Scott Adams, and he was a Trump supporter from very early on. He really became a prominent figure in that movement. And he's saying we're about a day away from Trump being arrested for leaving cocaine in the White House. So, yeah, that's where we are right now. Obviously, it was Hunter's cocaine. And obviously, if it were anthrax, the Secret Service would know exactly who did it. It was one of the most secure buildings in the entire world, in the White House. But no. Oh, yeah, we can't figure out whose cocaine it was. It was Hunter's. We all know it was Hunter's. Daryl is reminding us that V4F laying our cards on the table raffle is underway. Details on Telegram page, same name. Check them out on Telegram. V4F laying our cards on the table. That is to support our operating costs here at V4F. We also have the V4F support fund that goes to helping Canadians who are suffering under this tyranny. So yeah, please donate generously to both if you're able. Okay, here's DC Drano, and he says FBI whistleblower testifies under oath that FBI won't allow 11,000 plus hours of January 6th footage to be released because it would expose undercover agents committing crimes inside the Capitol. This is why they're indicting Trump, to cover up their January 6th setup. Yes, exactly. That is exactly what's happening. They set the whole thing up, and they're going after Trump now to basically legitimize this fraud, to give truth to the lie. And to keep him from running for president in 2024, because, well, I mean, I like I'm always saying, it's the Chinese Communist Party's tactic to simply call anybody who represents even the slightest bit of an impediment to their agenda for global dominance racist. That's what they do, is they just call everybody racists and talk about how evil and colonialist the West is and stuff like this, because they're still butthurt for getting their asses kicked by the Brits in the 1840s in the so-called Opium Wars. It wasn't about opium. That's their propaganda line. And they hate those white Anglo-Saxon Protestant colonizers who kick their asses. And so that's what's happening. But anyway, here is the clip.
Those individuals were inside the Capitol, to which the SSA responded back, and I was privy to these conversations firsthand. Why can't you show us? Why can't you just send us give us access to the 11,000 hours of video that's available? Because there may be UC's undercover officers or CHS's confidential human sources on those videos whose identity we need to protect.
So, Mr. Allen, you got retaliated against.
Those individuals were inside the Capitol, to which the SSA responded back, and I was privy.
All right, there you go. Metzislav was just saying, one would think it was Hunter's Coke. What if it was actually for Joe to get him up and running, since he doesn't know where he is half the time and falling asleep all over the place? I think it's probably meth in Joe's case. I mean, I've read a little bit about, like, say, JFK, for example. Apparently that's what they used for him. I can't remember the disease that he had, but he actually had a pretty debilitating disease that probably would have disqualified him from becoming president in the first place, but it was all kind of kept under wraps. And that was something his personal physician would do, was shoot him up with some meth to get him up out of his chair before he went out there and gave a speech sometimes. So yeah, if they're doing that kind of a thing with Joe Biden, then I would think it would be cocaine. It would probably be something a little stronger than that. But that's speculation on my part, though, so take it for what it's worth. Okay, so here's DC Drano, and they're saying, breaking: Michigan Attorney General charges 16 Trump electors with felonies for sending alternate electors. Here's video of a van dropping off hundreds of thousands of ballots around 3 a.m. in Detroit without any GOP monitors. Where are the felonies for these election stealers? So here you go. Here's the security.
This is inside the TCF Center. Now, the local media said that this never happened. Hattie actually called me on November 4th. She was inside the TCF, and she said, "Jim, you won't believe it. I just heard that a van dropped off boxes of ballots in the middle of the night, and she was working inside the TCF that morning." So we put in a request to get this video. It took months. And we got this at Gateway Pundit. We put this up on on our site. We tweeted about it, and that's when we lost our Twitter account, by the way, by putting up this video. There's a lead car, an escort car that comes in. You can see here each time he hands something to the people inside, and then this van drives in, and they actually came in twice. Now, we had local media, one of the top reporters there. I'm not going to mention his name. He said that this never happened. He was there all night. There was no fraud. Nothing happened. So now we have the video of that.
There you go. So that is what happened with the 2020 election. And as I'm always pointing out, we know here in Canada now that the Chi-Coms, the CCP, they interfered in the 2021 election, the 2019 election, with the intent of getting a liberal minority in government, and that's exactly what they got. And you got the 2020 American election in between those two elections. You really think they didn't have a hand in that? The mail-in ballots, there were hundreds of thousands of them all over the place that just seem to appear in the middle of the night. So basically what it looks like is they counted up all the votes, realized that Trump won in a landslide, and then it was just a matter of how many boxes of Biden ballots do we have to open. And there you go. There's the video graphic evidence of what they were doing. So here's Libs of TikTok. They're pretty great. And they're saying, here's a mashup of Democrats explicitly calling for violence and unrest. When will any of them be held accountable? Well, they're with the regime. So it's going to be quite a while, I think, if ever.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. And maybe there will be.
So that's Nazi Pelosi, boomer female. As I'm always pointing out, it is the generation at peak institutional power, the boomer generation that really matters right now. And, you know, Trudeau is basically just the Wizard of Oz. The man behind the curtain is the boomer.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator. And
this is what the prophet generational archetype always does throughout the cycle of history is they polarize our societies, basically balkanize empires. They fracture us into factions and then drive those factions to fight each other, go to war.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick them.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized right up to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said, if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to...
Johnny Depp is a boomer, too. I had to go look that up.
I have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight. And if you see
there's Mad Maxine Waters.
Anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yep, there you go. And yeah, you can see the leaders there are overwhelmingly boomers. And that is essentially what happens is, you know, if they don't get their way, they just throw tantrums. And when people at peak institutional power throw tantrums, the rest of us die. Suffer under this oppression. So here is John Borrows, and he's tweeting out, this is absolutely disgusting and dangerous. Kevin McCarthy is claiming that Donald Trump was notified he's being investigated over January 6th because he, quote, went up in the polls, close quote. Okay, I'm going to let, he's just saying, oh, Kevin, you are a delusional coward. But here is Speaker McCarthy weighing in on the arrest of Donald Trump, or the incipient arrest. I'm not sure if he's been arrested yet. I went to try and find out, but I don't think so. So here we go.
Well, I guess under a Biden administration, Biden America, you'd expect this. If you notice recently, President Trump went up in the polls and was actually surpassing President Biden for re-election. So what do they do now? Weaponize government to go after their number one opponent. It's time and time again. I think the American public is tired of this. They want to see equal justice, and the idea that they utilize this to go after those who politically disagree with them is wrong. Well, I guess under a Biden administration.
There you go, Speaker McCarthy. I think I think that's fair comment. And here is a meme from quite a while ago. I think this was for the 2020 election that Trump put out there. And here he is just kind of sitting down, pointing at the camera, looking straight into it. He's looking at us. He's pointing at us. And the caption at the top reads, "They're not after me. They're after you. I'm just in the way." Yep. I think that's essentially what it is. He is the one who is standing up for the rest of us. So, he's evil, racist, Hitler, warmonger or something. He didn't start any new wars. He pulled out of all kinds of different places. The world was a much safer and more prosperous place under the helmsmanship of the great Donald. And, they can't have that. They don't want the rest of us having wealth. Nope. It's all for Boomer, all that wealth. They got to have it all. Okay, and here is Team USA, and they say the people stand with Donald Trump. So this was posted July 18th. I'm thinking it was probably around the same time, but here they are.
You're the man! You're the man! They can't touch you, baby! We love Trump! 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 We love Trump!
There you go. Very much beloved, I think, by his supporters, and what a group of people. They all seem like such wonderful people and stuff like that. They're all very positive, and Americans are so patriotic. I lived down there for 4 years, and they're pretty great people, man. They're great. And Susan is here saying Trump is the only president that tried to stop child trafficking. Yeah, that's another great point. And Shannon is saying, my sis lives in Arizona. She says, mad respect for Trump, only president to do what he said he was going to do. Yeah. And that was something that I was tracking like his entire presidency. It was like he was getting absolutely massacred in the media. But if you look at what he was doing, it's just whatever he promised he was going to do. They did everything they could to stop him from building the wall. So he had some limited success there, but still, I remember just the rhetoric alone resulted in a 70% decrease in illegal crossings on the southern border, and that made America safer. It made everybody safer. Child trafficking obviously would have taken a huge hit from that. But anyway, that's why they need them out of the way. They want to traffic children and hoard all the wealth. Okay, here's the Vigilant Fox over on Twitter. They're pretty great, so give them a follow. And he's just got a lot of long quotes here, but basically the caption reads, Andrew Brigden, democracy is under threat like never before, and it's coming from our own institutions. Yes, and like I'm saying, it's the institutional power that matters right now. It is the institutional power that matters, broadly speaking, but it gets to be a particular problem during the fourth turning when the profit generational archetype reaches peak institutional power. That's the one that's born in the wake of the previous major crisis. This one right now being the boomer generation born in the wake of the Second World War. So, the institutions have basically been turned against us, right? Okay, so here we go.
The very concept of the democracy that we've taken for granted all of our lives is under threat as it never has been before. And it's not just in my country, it's not across Europe, it is across the whole of the world. It's not from external armies mounding up on our borders this time, but it is from the corruption and the decay of our own institutions are allowing this to happen. I think every one of us who's elected and represents our people, we need to remember that we are always the servants of the people. We are not their masters. And some of my colleagues and some elected representatives around the world have forgotten this lesson. They will need to learn this lesson again. We are entrusted to represent our constituents and their best interests at all times. And when their rights are threatened, we are duty bound to defend them. So the World Health Organization is an unelected, diplomatically immune, tax-exempt group that bears no resemblance to the good faith Florence Nightingale Union of Nations set up over 75 years ago. Public health and the decisions surrounding it now exist as a monopoly of the WHO, headed up by bureaucrats in Geneva, whose leadership has been embroiled in scandal after scandal. And the majority of the influence on the WHO now is by external entities. And indeed, as has been mentioned, one of the richest men in the world has a massive influence over the WHO. Indeed, I think 84% of all the funding of the WHO now is by external commercial sources, with an ability to direct the area that your generous donations to the WHO will send their policies. So it's basically pay to play. If you have enough money, you can influence the WHO. Not exactly the people I'd like to be deciding in the future whether my constituents are locked into their houses, whether they can see their relatives, if they have to wear masks, and if they have to take mandatory medication. I would say the least qualified people in the world to make those decisions. And any parliament that decides to abdicate its responsibilities to its constituents does not deserve the name of being a parliament and does not deserve a seat in any elected assembly. We have no right to relinquish our sovereignty, the sovereignty of our nations, because it's not mine to give away. It's not any of us to give away. Sovereignty always belongs to the people, and every election should be returned back to the people, where they will again decide who they allow to represent them.
Very well said. Again, that's Vigilant Fox. They've been awesome on Twitter. And Cora is saying our institutions treat us like serfs. We don't even get a voice anymore. Yeah, that is part of the cycle of history. Is basically, when we're in a fourth turning, our institutions, we work for them, right? We make them look good. We pay them. We make them richer. We see it across the board. It's all about the people at the top advancing their careers. Brenda Lucki stood on the graves of dead children to gaslight senior RCMP investigators into promoting the Liberals' gun confiscation agenda. We saw Michael Wernick being the first clerk of the Privy Council in Canadian history to resign in disgrace, replaced by Janice Charette, who basically orchestrated the whole Emergency Measures Act in collaboration with Jody Thomas, so on and so forth. The deans, tenured professors, turning our universities into indoctrination mills, brainwashing the millennials who are coming out in droves as the witch hunters, just like in the Dark Ages. That's what would have happened as well. That's what we're back to now is basically serfdom. And I do think that the debt, it's a kind of debt serfdom this time around. It gets a little bit more technologically advanced every time we go through one of these cycles. But children are being born in Canada right now in debt. I'm going to need a pretty good explanation as to how that's not serfdom. They owe that debt of their labor. Like that's what your money is it's your time. Time is money. Money is time. And that's what they're doing, is they're stealing time from the unborn. They're stealing a piece of their lives that is now dedicated to serving the state and servicing that debt that they racked up. So it's serfdom. Okay, here's a little bit of good news coming out of Blacklock's reporter. Here is Yuan Pao Wu, who is the guy, one of the senators that we have, who is threatening to sue anybody who criticizes the Chi-Coms or the CCP, and he says anti-China rhetoric or anti-Chinese, something like this, playing the race card all the time. That's what they do. Is they just call anybody who criticizes Chinese communism are racism or are racist. Anybody who stands up to their agenda. So here's Black Locks reporter. Pro-China petition sputters. A petition opposing federal introduction of a public registry of foreign agents is closed with fewer than 2,500 signatures, a fraction of other petitions, records show. Liberal-appointed Senator Yuen-Pao Wu had appealed to Canadians to rally behind it, quote, sign the petition. So yeah, they're calling this Foreign Agent Registry Act it's racist. It's really racist. And they've had one of these acts down in the United States since the 30s. So we're way behind the 8 ball on this. And this is a simple matter of national security and sovereignty. So it's to protect Canadians. And Yuen-Pao Wu doesn't want us to be protected at all. Here is, this is Pelham over on Twitter. And just a reminder, here's what's going on in France. It's getting harder and harder to dig anything up as to what's going on in France. But this was posted on July 18th, so yesterday. Okay, here is, they're saying, France laws have just been passed to allow police to tap into phone and computer devices of protesters without their knowledge or consent. Full totalitarian control. So this is something that we reported on here a while back, where they're able to shut down the internet during nighttime hours. There's a lot going on there, though. There are these radical factions where we can see jihadist elements teaming up with Antifa now in the rioting, and there's a lot of coordination that's taking place online. So I could see a reasonable emergency measure put in place in that regard to kind of thwart some of the coordination. But it's a question of wait and see. Let's see how they implement it. And here's what we see right now. So it looks like tear gas and smoke bombs going off everywhere here. Protesters everywhere. Here come the riot police. Okay, so that, I believe, is what they're driving us toward. I talk a lot about the art of war, and Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War in the 5th century BC that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. France is really living with like the effects of the fallout from the 2015 migrant crisis. A lot of Western Europe is. We seem to be better insulated from that over here in North America because people can't migrate by foot from the Middle East to the Middle East and Africa to North America. And also there's a lot of boats and stuff like that are crossing the Mediterranean and the English Channel that are full of migrants that are not tracked and coming in illegally and so on and so forth. And so they seem to be living with the fallout of that now. They're trying to run the same playbook here in North America with the porous border at the United States. It's non-existent. It's not porous. Down on the southern U.S. border. And it's not just people from South America that are coming through there. They're talking about a lot of CCP operatives potentially coming through there. They've apprehended, jihadist terrorists at the border. There are people coming from all over the world coming into countries south of the United States that are easier to enter, and then migrating by foot up through the southern border. And of course, we're seeing a lot of that with Roxham Road here in Canada. And so it's that's the strategy, is just to eliminate that security that we have in the form of borders, which are intended to screen out the violent operatives and the criminals, and allow actual immigrants and actual refugees in. But But that's not what's happening. They're not screening these people out. They're not deporting them when they find them, and so we just end up with more violence, less safe society, and eventually the state, like, it'll just implode and collapse on its own. It doesn't really look like we're going to be as productive and economically prosperous while all of this is going on. And so the state will just implode and we'll be defeated without the Chi-Coms having to fire a shot. Okay, and here is John Carter on Twitter, and he says, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, Nazi Pelosi, excitedly sent $45 billion to Ukraine. Meanwhile, this is her district. So this is a pretty good compare and contrast here. Check this out.
It was historic. He and Churchill were the two wartime presidents.
Video on the right is just showing her district, California there. And it's nothing but homeless people, drug addicts, that kind of thing. So all of this is what weakens us as a society. It's just another prong in this attack. Whatever weakens the West is true. And here is Jagmeet Singh. He issued a statement. He's tweeting this out. He says, like so many of us, they came here for the promise of a better life, fleeing violent trauma. Now they're sleeping in the streets because this liberal government has failed them. I have written to the Prime Minister, reminding him every day he fails to act, their pain is prolonged. And he's got a graphic of the letter that he sent to the Prime Minister with his official letterhead at the top. And it says, Dear Mr. Prime Minister, I am writing to you with great urgency. Your government has failed to act on its promise to deliver $97 million for shelter support for refugees and people seeking asylum in Toronto. And in the past 2 weeks, there have been many reports of asylum seekers sleeping on the streets of Toronto. According to the city's Shelter Support and Housing Administration, more than 35% of the 9,000 people using Toronto's shelter system are refugees. Given that the refugees and immigration are under federal responsibility, your government has a duty to ensure the safety and well-being of these newcomers. Alarmingly, Toronto hasn't seen any federal funding since 2022, and they urgently need $157 million in order to provide shelter and protection to asylum seekers. The federal government must stop dragging its feet and deliver $97 million of promised funding to the city before it's too late. People seeking asylum in Canada come to our country hoping for a better future for themselves and their families. It is shameful that they are being turned out in the streets of Toronto to brave the heat waves and rain while waiting for help finding shelter of their own. Just wait till the winter hits. You think it's bad during the heat. About 9 times as many people die of cold as die of heat every year. So back to the letter. These people are not just statistics. They are grandparents, parents, children, and families that have fled dangerous and traumatic conditions. I call on your government to work in partnership with the City of Toronto to deliver them help now so that they can get off the streets and Canada can fulfill its promise of a safer and better life. I look forward to your timely action and response to this urgent matter. Sincerely, Jimmy Singh. The narrative is palpable here. You can really kind of see the narrative coming through because the assumption is that they are asylum seekers that are fleeing oppression and that they're legitimate refugees, but we don't really know that. Like, they're just allowing anybody to come in. A lot of them are going to be economic migrants and looking for a better life, I suppose, and a lot of them are also going to be criminal elements. So the fact of the matter is, you need a border, you need border security, you need to screen out the violent elements and people that are coming here to exploit the rest of us. But anyway, there's no concern for that, really. There's no concern for the people here. All of the concern is for other people. And Susan is pointing out that most are men. That was something that I was tracking very early on, especially with the migrant crisis. Like, it's almost all fighting age males. So that's not going to be a good thing down the road. And I can remember even like when we were bringing people, there was that whole scam they pulled where they said that we were bringing a bunch of refugees here, the migrants, because of the migrant crisis. That was when the media spun that whole story about a toddler who drowned in the Mediterranean. He washed up on a beach in Greece, I think. And there was, it turned out that his dad was a trafficker. He was driving the boat that had a bunch of migrants in it and doing so recklessly to the point that it capsized and his son drowned. He was going to Germany because they had better dental care. He was going there from Turkey, I believe, so already a safe location. And they spun that whole story to get Trudeau elected because he's the compassionate one, not the evil Stephen Harper. And then they started a program to bring so-called refugees into Canada, but they brought them from Turkey, where they were living in apartments in a safe location. Maybe that's better, I guess, than bringing. It might be a marginally better than bringing people from God knows where, but at the same time, it was all a big freaking scam. And when they were bringing people in, I remember there was this big ceremony with John McCallum and the photo op, and they're talking about these migrants and refugees, and they were all men. They were all fighting age males at the. There might have been one older guy, but there were all men at this photo op with John McCallum. And I was asking myself, well, where are the women and children here? Shouldn't they be the priority? I mean, if your country is in a state of civil war and you're a fighting age male, maybe go back and fight for your country, like our ancestors did, to give us the prosperity and safety that we now live in, sort of. Anyway, it's completely upside down. They're bringing all the guys who should be protecting their own in their home countries, the fighting age males, into the West. So here's CP24, and they're reporting Canada provided nearly $100 million to help refugees seek shelter in Toronto. The federal government will be providing an additional $210 million. That was a correction that came later. $100 million is in the title, but it looks like they updated the article here. The federal government will be providing an additional $210 million to fund interim housing for asylum seekers, and about half that money will be heading to Toronto, where dozens of refugees forced to camp out on the sidewalk outside a shelter are being shuttled to a church in New York. Immigration Minister Sean Fraser made the announcement on Tuesday morning, saying that a $97 million has been earmarked to help Toronto refugees who are not being supported under federal programs. Quote, "This will put us in a position where the city of Toronto will not have any concerns about the federal share of costs to ensure that they can provide housing to them should they choose to re-extend access to the shelter system in Toronto to asylum seekers who up until recently have been denied that access," close quote. The announcement comes as a group of about 30 or so people are being sent to a church after spending weeks sleeping outside a shelter intake center in Peter Street, on Peter Street, after they were told to instead seek help from federal programs. The city argued its shelter system is already too full and can't accommodate the increased demand. At the time, advocates accused the city of denying shelter to refugees and sending them on a, quote, cruel wild goose chase, close quote, by telling them to call Service Canada for aid. Toronto staff have said they require at least $100 million more in federal funding to keep up with the increase of refugees. The city claims that in May, there were 2,900 refugees claimants in Toronto's shelter system compared to the 537 claimants in September 2021. Holy smokes, that's a jump. 537 claimants in 2021, 2,900 in today in 2023. Okay. The announcement by Fraser appears to be a direct response to this request, weeks after asylum seekers were caught in the middle of a funding argument between all three levels of government. Ontario Premier Slug Ford sidestepped a question Tuesday morning about an additional provincial funding to help support the influx of refugees coming into the province. An unrelated news conference, he told reporters he has spoken to refugees in his riding, and what they really want are jobs. Quote, "They're all healthy. They all want to work. So the feds have to spend up the working permit. They have to speed up the working permits," close quote, he said. Quote, "Each of these people are sitting around for, what is it, literally 4 months or 4 or 5 months. That's unacceptable," close quote. Quote, "All they want is a better life," close quote. I hope that's true for everybody. I sincerely do. But I doubt very much that the proper controls and screening are being done. I've even heard from certain people within CBSA that they're trying to deport people and the feds aren't letting them. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. He said the federal government needs to provide the city of Toronto with additional funding to the tune of $150 million. Quote, I'm going to be all over the federal government to make sure that we get these people back on their feet. You can't just drop people and say, okay, we're all done. It doesn't work that way, close quote. Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow said she welcomed the new federal funding, but that is not enough to meet the demand of refugees arriving in the city. Quote, it may, however, provide a short-term stopgap, close quote, she said in a statement. Quote, we have been very clear as a city that we need to help accessing shelter space, personnel, funding, and support for the organization stepping up across the city to help those seeking shelter and housing, close quote. In a subsequent statement, the mayor said she will introduce a motion at Wednesday's council meeting on the refugee shelter and housing crisis. Quote, senior staff from all three levels of government had a productive discussion at today's senior operations and emergency management table, close quote, Chow said. Quote, I have been speaking with the Premier, Prime Minister, mayors, and staff to ensure action can be taken quickly to address this crisis, close quote. The Prime Minister Justin Trudeau agreed during the first meeting Tuesday to work with Chow to, quote, improve access to affordable housing and enhance refugee support and resettlement efforts, close quote, in the city. Meanwhile, Spadina Fort, York Member of Parliament Kevin Vaughan, whose riding included the shelter intake center, said the city could have put together temporary solutions rather than rely on federal funding. Quote, one of which was asking the federal government to open up the armory, as has been requested in the past, to get the homeless out of the cold in winter, close quote. He told News Talk 1010's More in the Morning Tuesday. Quote, they need to come together and find a sustainable long-term solution to the funding issue, not just for Toronto, but there have been over 4,400 asylum seekers in hotels in Niagara and Windsor, Ottawa, Cornwall, Mississauga, and Kingston, close quote. In the meantime, organizations and members of the business community have pitched in to relocate the refugees to Revival Time Tabernacle in Dufferin Street, where they will be given mental health supports and accommodations. How many can we possibly accommodate? How many refugees are there? Is it the case that we just plan on bringing the entire world here, to the entire third world into Canada, and expect that it'll be the utopia? I don't think that's what happens. I think if you import the entire third world into Canada, then what you're going to end up with is not going to be Canada, the Canadian utopia, but the third world. So that's the sad state of affairs. But that seems to be the strategy, to implode our country into a third world hellhole where we are ripe for exploitation by the Chinese Communist Party. Okay. They'll come in and scoop up all our resources, residential properties, push us out into the streets with higher interest rates on our mortgages, and it'll be they'll just own us without firing a shot. So here's Andy Lee, and she says the federal government will be providing an additional $210 million to fund the interim housing for asylum seekers. About half of that money will be heading to Toronto, where dozens of refugees forced to camp out on the sidewalk to shuttle a church. Okay, so I put this up there. It looks like everybody went and updated their tweets or something like that. But it was originally 100 million. You can see it in the title. They said 100 million, but it's actually 210 million, maybe 212 million. I think I saw that out there somewhere. This is Yukon Strong, who was correcting Andy Lee, and I think she updated her tweet there. Says, slight correction, Andy. Quote, the Canadian taxpayer will be providing an additional $210 million in inflationary deficit spending. Good point, Yukon Strong. Inflationary deficit spending. So that's a double-edged sword there as well. It's got an additional prong on it. Okay. And here is Laura Ingram from the Ingram Angle over there on Fox News down south. She's one of the American reporters who's been taking a special interest in Canada, Tucker Carlson as well. Tucker Carlson was doing a documentary on the tyranny that we're living under here in Canada when he got fired from Fox News. So it'd be nice if maybe we could get that that documentary released somehow. That he interviewed Lauren Southern, all kinds of stuff like that. So, all right, here is Laura Ingraham, and she's saying Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau is a rather silly, fatuous man who touts multiculturalism but really wants a dictatorship of ideas. So here is Ingram. It's about 2.5 minutes long.
We've ruffled some feathers up north, as in Canada. All right, over the weekend, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau expressed his outrage that Canadian Muslims are thinking for themselves and expressing strong disagreement with moves to normalize radical sexual teachings in schools.
Leave our kids alone! Leave our kids alone! Many immigrant communities supported Trudeau, and now what's he saying? He's saying that Muslims are being brainwashed. We've always had a concern. It's what's happening in our schools is getting worse and worse and worse. And now they've crossed the red line. Our children are our red line.
Rather than perhaps reconsidering his nation's lurch to push these transgender and non-binary propaganda things on kids, Trudeau pulls a Hillary. Yeah, he blames the vast right-wing conspiracy.
There is an awful lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. People on social media, particularly fueled by the American right wing, are spreading a lot of untruths. These are people on the far right who have consistently stood against Muslim rights in the Muslim community. But they are weaponizing the issue of LGBT.
Of course, the angle was the first in cable to showcase Muslim parents, those who are fed up with sexual indoctrination squads and who are now working with social conservatives to stop the madness. Now, as for Trudeau, he's in his job for one reason, his last name. Well, maybe for another, maybe for his hair. It's pretty good. Now, personally, I love my Canadian friends, and it's a gorgeous place, but we're not about to take moralistic lectures from people who allow China to directly influence their elections, or to push more people to kill themselves, or to turn truckers into public enemies number one. Trudeau is a rather silly, fatuous man who touts multiculturalism, but really wants a dictatorship of ideas. Anyone who challenges his sacred cows may be canceled, punished, or, in some cases, even jailed. Nice try, Justin.
Okay, so thank you, Laura Ingram, for standing up for Canadians. Not that we're going to find anybody in the mainstream Canadian press to do that. Yeah, and I would like this to continue, actually, because as you can see, the more he continues to push the LGBTQ2 AIP ampersand Octothorpe agenda, the more he's alienating people, parents especially. And it doesn't matter if you're Muslim or Christian or atheist, as I am. It's jamming this ideology down people's throats, being absolutely tone deaf in your approach and ignoring their concerns. Anybody who expresses concern, well, you're a bad person, right? And so that's what they're doing right now. And he's talking down to the Muslims like, oh, these, like they're idiots or something. They're just useful idiots for the American right. Give me a break. And you'll notice that they always say right wing here in Canada as if it's a dirty word or something like that. But that is the Marxist mass line attack approach. This is how the Marxists deal with what they call reactionaries, anybody who stands up to their agenda. They just call them names. They stigmatize and marginalize them. So that should give you a sense as to just how far down the garden path Canada really is. I mean, right wing is just a political term for, the right of center, and then the left of center is the left wing. But if you say left wing in Canada, they just kind of go, well, the left wing are the good guys. And there are just those crazy racist right wingers. And then there's everybody else, right? And that's, I think, a pretty good indication as to just how far down the garden path we really are. Here is Wall Street Silver, and they're tweeting, in 2017, the UAE foreign minister warned Europe on what's coming, but the Europeans didn't listen. So here is this is a man wearing some very traditional Arab garb here from the United Arab Emirates. I saw multiple commentators around the time, like from Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth, that were saying, no, we need to control these migrant flows. And they, like Saudi Arabia, had air-conditioned tents for the Hajj that could house like 1 million people. They took in 0 refugees, as did Japan and multiple other countries. It's all to the West. All of it has to go to the West. Anyway, here is this guy.
And let me say this in English so you can understand what I'm saying.
I have translation.
No, I know you have translation, but I just want to make sure you get it right. There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance. And
I'm really glad to hear that last part from it's pure ignorance. These people have a very idealistic view on the current state of the world and humanity. There are all kinds of people out there who want to murder us, who want to destroy the West, who they don't think the same way that the rest of us do. I happen to think that the default setting on the human species is that of a sociopath. I take that from Freud's writings in Civilization and Its Discontents, where he talks about how the process of civilizing our toddlers results in a kind of necessary trauma on the mind that installs the superego into the mind, which is what most of us would think of as a conscience. It's kind of the internal overseer that shames us for our impure thoughts and watches us while we masturbate. And so in a lot of places, like especially poorer places, people don't really invest in their toddlers the same way that we do in more prosperous society, because they're not even sure if they're going to make it. Like a woman in Afghanistan who probably dies in her early 40s will have about 10 kids by that time, but only about 3 of them will survive. So they tend not to get too attached to the toddlers because they're not sure if they're going to be around for very long. I think that that's probably what we're bringing in by and large, or at least a large portion of the people seeking asylum perhaps don't value human life in the same way that the rest of us do. And here this guy is coming from the Middle East and saying, you folks out there in the West, you don't understand what you're really dealing with here. So this is a very prosperous society here, the United Arab Emirates, and they do seem to be moderating. They're known for things like still stoning women. I think the last time they did that was around 2008, 2010, something like that. But they recently signed on to the Abraham Accords to normalize relations with Israel. So that's an amazing leap forward, I think. We should probably listen to what they're saying, because they've been trying to warn us since the 2015 migrant crisis. Okay. Here is a long tweet from Dan Knight, and he is saying, good morning to all of you proud Canadians out there. This is a picture down here that he's sharing, by the way, of here is shameless O'Regan and Trudeau himself having a little tickle fight as they gaze lovingly into one another's eyes. Here's Dan Knight, and he's saying, good morning to all you proud Canadians out there. I know many of you have been following the developments in the ILWU strike. So this is moving into the port strike there in Vancouver. It's a messy situation, to say the least. And what strikes me is the blatant spin that the corporate media, the likes of Globalist News and CTV, have put on it. They've been quick to highlight the supposed benefits of the mediated deal. They toss around figures regarding pensions and pay as if they are to the be all and end all of the issue. And yet they've remained conspicuously silent on the topic of the company's pandemic era profiteering. All of us Canadians have felt the pinch of rising grocery costs and inflation eating away at our hard-earned dollars. And who can forget Trudeau's deflection of his government's responsibility for this inflation, blaming it on supply chain issues? But let's dig a little deeper in, shall we? According to Dr. Jim Stanford, a noted economist and director of Vancouver's Centre for Future Work, the issue goes far beyond simple supply chain problems. Quote, container shipping costs rose fivefold as the global economy reopened. That helped spark the inflation, which has roiled the global economy ever since, close quote. If you found it hard to make ends meet lately, you're not alone. And if you've been scratching your head wondering why your usual groceries cost more, this is part of the story. The Trudeau administration would like you to believe that greedy suppliers are to blame. Meanwhile, the indefatigable Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, recently shared his perspective on the ILWU strike. Quote, I understand why the workers in Vancouver are desperate to fight for better wages and working conditions. The exorbitant inflation has made it impossible for hardworking employees to afford basic needs. The way to avoid these strikes is to bring home powerful paychecks, close quote. The mainstream narrative perpetuates the idea that it's legal for corporations to amass billions in profit, but suggests that these workers are replaceable. But that's a gross oversimplification. It is indeed legal for corporations to profit immensely, but it is equally legal and ethical for workers to unionize, demand better wages, and push for job security. All of this really just leads to more inflation. You raise the wages, that's going to raise costs, that's going to increase costs to the consumer. And then those consumers are going to need higher wages, and it's just a self-licking ice cream cone down to famine. All right. I've had the privilege of speaking with ILWU members who understandably wish to remain unnamed. They've shared how the companies are pulling out all the stops to contract out their work and erode their presence on the waterfront. So you see, the strike isn't simply about wages, it's about job security. It's about a collective voice demanding to be heard, demanding fair treatment. As Canadians, we mustn't forget our inherent right to unify and advocate for improvement, be it from our government bodies or our employees. Regrettably, if we are to accept the Trudeau's versions of events, all we've been gifted from these Titan port companies is an insidious wave of inflation. The biased reporting of corporate media has unmasked them as the propaganda arm of big corporations. They aren't your ally. They are the mouthpiece of the wealthy elite. But in their short-sightedness, they're revealing their true colors. I'm gonna throw to my boomer commentary on this one. They all kind of stick together, and they are the editorial boards as well as the corporate elites, or the elites more broadly, by a consequence of natural attrition at this point in our history. Back to the tweet. Meanwhile, after several hours of radio silence, while many of you were sleeping, Labor Minister Shameless O'Regan has hinted via tweet that the possible recall of Parliament, a move that has appealing to the governing Liberals as a skunk at the garden party, with tensions between the BCMEA and the ILWU continuing to disrupt Canada's ports. The government is looking at, quote, all available options, close quote, signaling that the summer recess may come to an abrupt end. If this happens, the Liberals will be thrust back into the hot seat, forced to confront not just the port crisis, but also their catalog of policy missteps. I don't think they're missteps. I think this is deliberate. In an audacious display of remote, and by that I mean that the Liberal Party is a proxy for China. In the audacious display of remote management, the Labour Minister Shameless O'Regan has made it clear that physical proximity to the problem is merely optional when you're dealing with crisis. Sending tweets about the crucial port crisis all the way from the serenity of Eastern Canada, he's made a compelling case for the efficiency of governing from the comfort of a different time zone. After all, who needs direct engagement when you can address a multi-million-dollar crisis via Twitter, right? It's almost as if he's taken a leaf out of the How to Avoid Face-to-Face Confrontation handbook, taking the path of least resistance, issuing statements from a safe distance, much like breaking up with someone over text. Reagan's text message governance is a stark reminder of the distance, both literally and figuratively, between this government and the very real challenges Canadians are facing. But hey, who are we to expect apt crisis management from the Trudeau cabinet? After all, out of sight, out of mind seems to be their mantra. And let's not overlook the elephant in the room. One has to wonder, why wasn't Minister O'Regan on location to oversee the final signing of the agreement? This is not some minor bureaucratic formality we're discussing. It's a critical labor dispute that holds enormous implications for Canada's economy. The on-the-ground presence of a federal minister during such a pivotal moment is not only fitting, but absolutely crucial. But alas, O'Regan's glaring absence at such a crucial juncture, and his choice to remotely deal with this is yet another testament to the chronic ineptitude we've come to associate with Trudeau's cabinet. It's as if they're striving to redefine leadership in the most unorthodox way, replacing the concept of being present with being conveniently distant. This is just another day in the life of the Trudeau administration where incompetence seems to be the only consistent strategy. One can't help but chuckle at the ongoing saga of governing by text. It would indeed be humorous if it weren't so damaging for the country we love. The world's gaze is fixed firmly upon us, scrutinizing every move, every decision. It's a stage upon which we must perform, and the narrative we project will echo globally. Let's not forget, my fellow Canadians, that our GDP per capita is less than half of our neighbors to the south. This isn't a statistic to be taken lightly. It's a glaring disparity that highlights the critical importance of this labor dispute. A fair deal for the dock workers isn't just a victory for them, it's a benchmark for the entire nation. It's a testament to what we, as Canadians, value: fair compensation for honest work. If we, as a country, are ready to step up and demand better for our workforce, it will send a powerful message resonating across industries, across provinces, and indeed across borders. That's a good point. The GDP per capita, we're less than half of the United States. We're always saying, oh, those Americans, and they don't even have the communist healthcare system and all that stuff. We're so much better off than they are, but it's not true. It's absolutely not true. That's all part of the propaganda. I lived in the United States for 4 years. I was in their healthcare system. I was in the military healthcare system, and it's night and day. Just being a Canadian Armed Forces military member in the healthcare system, so-called, like it's all for show up here, but you go down there and it's like, holy smokes. I went to the doctor looking for an MRI, and they were like, here, just take this ticket down the hall to radiology and take a tag take a number at the desk, and we'll get you right in there. It took like half an hour or something like that. It's the same as getting an x-ray down there, but up here, I'm waiting for an MRI right now, and it's I'm not holding my breath. Let's just say that. If we as a country are ready to step up and demand better for our workforce, it will send a powerful message resonating across industries, across provinces, and indeed across borders. As the curtain rises on this unfolding drama, rest assured I'll be there, poised to hold the Trudeau government accountable for its glaring inadequacies. I relish the opportunity to turn the harsh spotlight back onto Ottawa, illuminating the many failings of Trudeau's waning leadership for the world to see. It's not waning. He never had it to begin with. And so, as we embrace ourselves for the days ahead, I bid you good day, my fellow Canadians. The world is watching, but remember, this is our fight, our story to tell. Together, we can make a difference. God bless you, and God bless our great nation. Maybe if they would just unshackle us so we can get back to being to our peak productivity, we wouldn't need to be doing any of this stuff. But that's it's the global economic slowdown that's been artificially imposed on us that's really driving up costs, and therefore we need to raise wages, which is a cost to the bottom line, which is going to drive those costs up again. And it's like I said, you just end up in this this kind of chain reaction that gets set in motion, and the result is unmitigated inflation. But it is important, I think, that these people, well, they have a right to collectively bargain, and they should absolutely be standing up to this stuff. But I think the long-term effects are probably going to be negative. unless we change something drastically in the way that we're doing business right now. Just unshackle people. And here is Terry, and he's pointing out, I lived in Hawaii for 3 years. The healthcare system worked well pre-Obama. I was down there during Obama, and I was like, wow, I can't believe how much better it is down here. But people in Canada are so propagandized that they think that people are dying in the streets down there in the United States, and they'll talk about how terrible their HMOs are. And I'm like, their HMOs are probably still better than Canadian healthcare. Anyway, here is Blacklock's reporter again, and they're reporting could see 1 million war refugees. So this is in relation to Ukraine. And here's the article. It says, well, the one pair that I can get, it says there is, quote unquote, no limit on the number of Ukrainian war refugees allowed into Canada, says a Department of Immigration memo. A total of 1.1 million Ukrainians applied for free flights prior to a deadline that expired last Saturday. Quote, I know all Canadians are inspired by the remarkably brave people of Ukraine, close quote. Yeah, okay. Who is he quoting there? I'm not sure. It's coming from the Department of Immigration memo. A total of 1.1 million Ukrainians applied for free flights. Free flights. There's no such thing as a free flight. So who's paying for that? Well, I think we can guess. Yeah, and how many of those people are, say, Azov Battalion, Nazis? Who knows? So I doubt very much there's any screening going on there, but once they bring in all these different factions that are fighting each other overseas, they'll fight each other here, and it'll be a slow collapse into tyranny. And Chinese Communist Party's on standby, ready to come in here and rule over the ashes, scoop up whatever's left for themselves. Okay, and here is the National Compost, and the title is Freakland says her patience is wearing pretty thin with Vancouver port strike. We believe that a deal can be reached. It must be reached, and it must be reached very soon, said the Deputy Prime Minister while speaking in Saskatchewan. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freakland drove from Winnipeg to the Solution potash mine near Belle Plaine on Tuesday to talk about the economy and the need to shore up domestic production of potash and critical minerals. But Freakland, also Minister of Finance, had stern words for the 7,400 members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, ILWU, Canada in Vancouver, who have been on strike since July 1st. The MP's stop in Belle Plaine focused on matters of inflation, affordability, and quality of life as the striking ILWU workers fight for protections against contracting, outwork, and automation at higher wages. Quote, we are really focused on creating a high-paying careers for people here in Saskatchewan and bringing investment into communities across this province, close quote, she said. Still, Freakland said, quote, my patience is wearing pretty thin with self-imposed supply chain challenges, close quote. That comment came after speaking on the issues of, quote, supply chain snarls, close quote, that have driven up inflation recently and the strains felt by supply chain choke points during the pandemic. Yeah, they did all that. They created those choke points. They destroyed the supply chain. So this is all the result of their malfeasance and policy making. And what do? They scapegoat the little guy. They blame us. They're the ones who they're like the good idea fairies who come in like, here's what we're going to do, and then impose the burden and the hardship for solving these problems on the people at the bottom of the social ladder. So, quote, we believe that deal can be reached. It must be reached, and it must be reached very soon, close quote. While there have been calls for the federal government to legislate against the workers, Freakland did not commit or say that it was even on the table. Quote, this cannot go on. It is causing real challenges for the Canadian economy. And look, like we have just been through a very challenging time with our economy, close quote, she said. Yeah, thanks to you guys. In Saskatchewan, the port strike has meant Nutrien Limited has reined in production at its Corey Potash mine. On Tuesday, the company warned that a prolonged work stoppage at the port could affect production at its other potash mines in the province. While at the potash mine, Freakland thanked the workers there and at other mines across the province. She thanked them for, quote, stepping up and being the reliable suppliers that the world's democracies and our friends in Ukraine really need right now. Oh, it's all about Ukraine. What the hell does that have to do with anything? When it comes to the ability to look at countries other than China and Russia for critical minerals, Freakland highlighted that, quote, the global clean economy will depend on critical minerals and metals such as copper, uranium, lithium, and helium, and Saskatchewan is richly endowed with 23 of the most in-demand critical minerals and metals, close quote. In Saskatchewan, the sole rare earth mineral processing facility has shut down production. While other critical mineral producers are still online, the rare earth sector is currently still under construction in the province. Pretty sure China would like to have those. Asked if the feds would earmark more money to support the industry, Freakland did not commit to that, but ensuring a domestic supply of the rare earth minerals needed for green technology is crucial, especially since the market is largely dominated by China at the moment. Quote, we as Canadians working together with our allies need to be sure that we are not strategically vulnerable to that Chinese dominance in the way that Europe found itself vulnerable to Russian control of natural gas, close quote, said Freakland. And while the focus on the Deputy Prime Minister might be international and on growing and reinforcing domestic resources and capabilities, there has been considerable pushback from Canada's premiers who were meeting in Winnipeg. Freakland, when asked what can the federal government do with respect to the national unity and addressing the concerns raised by the provinces, said she hoped, quote, the premiers will bring goodwill and positive intent to all of our conversations, close quote. Yeah, I think that's projection. We're all hoping that perhaps the federal government will bring some goodwill into this. I don't think that there's any goodwill coming from them right now. And, we just saw earlier how they're diminishing Muslim Canadians as being some kind of rubes and useful idiots for the American right wing. Perhaps you should be a little bit more, tolerant of Canadians. So I don't think that that's what we're seeing, though, right? There's a lot of contempt for the little guy coming from these self-styled elites. Okay, and here is Street Politics Canada over on YouTube. They did a pretty good video on this. It says that Freakland threatens to end protest with violence. So another trucker convoy, perhaps in the works. Let's just check out a few minutes of this one here.
In the issue, Chrystia Freakland, the Deputy Prime Minister, felt the need to take it upon herself and try to fix this. However, she sees fit, of course, but she expectedly ended up massively failing. Of course, Trudeau is nowhere to be found during this difficult time we face. Once the strike started to grow louder along many other recent problems, he took off in his private jet and went to Latvia to attend a NATO summit, showing to all how out of touch he truly is. He does not know what's going on in his country, nor does he care to know. He missed the Premier's meeting. He didn't even issue a statement about the ongoing port strikes. And he definitely does not care about Canadians struggling with their finances because of his policies. His reckless spending habits have led us to an economic catastrophe, which has consequently led to this strike. But as I said, he doesn't care about the repercussions of his idiocy. He doesn't care about those workers. He just cares about the money he does not have. He left Chrystia Freakland, Deputy Prime Minister, to mess this up however she sees fit. Chrystia Freakland arrived in British Columbia on Tuesday to address the port strike. But don't be fooled, she's not there to actually address the issue or even to help reach a deal. She's obviously there only to threaten those workers who have been struggling with the high living costs which are happening because of her government's inadequacy. As those workers are trying to protect themselves and their families from contracting out and low wages, Freakland thought this would be a good opportunity to intimidate those who are literally fighting for their lives. She's quoted saying that her patience is wearing thin. Freakland has threatened the port workers who are only demanding their basic human rights. She also said that a deal can be reached and they need to reach it very soon, manipulating those who are inferior to her into thinking they are the problem with this when truly they are the victims. This is an obvious show of force, trying to abuse her authority to force them to back down. I doubt her intentions for this action were pure. They were likely just as wicked as her words. What Freeland is doing is quite reminiscent of the precursors of how the federal government handled the Freedom Convoy protests. The Freedom Convoy was a reaction to the ridiculous vaccine mandates that were forced on us back in 2022. People gathered for weeks to call for lifting restrictions and stop those mandates. The Liberal government kept warning people that their patience is wearing thin, as they are doing with the port strike. Freeland is basically threatening these workers that at any time now they won't think twice before using coercion and violence to end the strike. The federal government did not hold back during the Freedom Convoy protests, and they definitely will not hold back this time either. They were arresting people en masse, shooting rubber bullets at them, and just brutalizing them in every way possible. So for Chrystia Freeland to even imply that this is what would be coming next for the port strike protesters is literally nothing but a show of force, letting those people know that she has the upper hand. If the government really wanted to help those protesters, they would try to reach a deal with them, not intimidate them into submission. Yes, the strike is affecting thousands, if not millions of Canadians, but those people are why things were running smoothly. To begin with, the least they deserve is proper compensation. In retrospect, despite being affected by the port strike as well, the premiers of Canada have been basically begging the Liberals to help those protesters, to listen to them, and to at least try to reach any middle ground. The premiers repeatedly called on the federal government to help, but they predictably never did. British Columbia's Premier David Eby has been quoted in the annual meeting of the premiers saying that those workers need to be treated fairly, and the issue at the port cannot drag on because it has a profoundly damaging impact across the country on workers that are also trying to feed their families right now. So there's huge urgency. The premiers did not all issue statements, of course, but Danielle Smith has been fighting for this matter since it began. Smith has urged Trudeau to take action and try to stop this from getting any worse, but of course, he did not listen. Smith has constantly urged Trudeau to address the issue because this will likely have massive economic repercussions on both Alberta and the rest of Canada, taking note that over $12 billion of Alberta's goods were shipped through the Vancouver and Prince Rupert ports. She doesn't just care about her province, she cares about Canada as a whole. Unlike Trudeau, Smith and Poilievre have been trying to raise awareness about the matter to try and force Trudeau to do his job as Prime Minister, but unfortunately, there is only so much they can do or say. Poilievre was quoted simply saying that the Prime Minister is not doing his job and that this is a federal matter and he is the federal Prime Minister. If Trudeau doesn't address our concerns anytime soon, I believe the port strikes will be the least of his worries. If it even is one, as people will not just gather just to protect their jobs anymore, we will be calling for his resignation and exile. Canada doesn't need a Prime Minister whose only care in the world is to rob Canadians of their hard-earned money, and it certainly doesn't need someone who just wants to cling to power regardless of the cost.
That is what's happening, though. I think that, he's scared, and that is a very dangerous situation for the rest of us when we have a tyrant who's scared. And this commentator here is talking about how he should be dethroned and exiled. So I think he's going to do everything he can to try to cleave to power. And Sharon over on YouTube is asking, there must be a way to rid ourselves of Trudeau and friends. It's getting harder and harder for them to do the tap dance. I think that the mainstream media is not just parroting the narrative around the CCP interference scandal, and they're asking for Mad Marco, the mendacious Mendocino's head. They don't seem to be letting go of some of these bigger issues. So what we need the full transparent public inquiry, and we need it expeditiously. There needs to be like a moratorium on this legislation. The opposition parties need to band together. I mean, I know that it's controlled opposition, but it does seem to be the case. The practice and professional politician, the paper tiger Pierre Poilievre, is our political bellwether, and he does seem to be coming out a little stronger on some of these issues than he has previously. And I credit Maxime Bernier for that. He seems to be the one moving the Overton window back to sanity, and so we see the conservatives, the cuck-servatives, taking up some of his talking points nowadays. So that's good to see. And here is Mike, and he's saying, I found a tutor for Chrystia Freakland. Chrystia Freakland. I'm willing to pay to have this young lady teach Freakland a thing or two about finances. So here we go.
Allow me to explain how our private banks and government work today. First, the Canadian government borrows money from the private banks. They then lend the debt-based money to Canada with compounded interest. The government then continues to increase taxation of Canadians year after year in order to pay back the interest on the exponentially growing national debt. What results is inflation, less real money for Canadians to spend into our economy, and the real money being used to pad the pockets of the banks. Also, the government gave the banks the ability to loan out money that doesn't exist in the form of loans. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a death pledge, or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. They don't actually have it in their bank vaults. Presently, the banks only have $4 billion on reserve, but they have loaned out over $1.5 trillion. To quote Graham Towers, each and every time a bank makes a loan, a new bank credit is created. New deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt. What I find interesting is even Jesus in Matthew 21 drove out the money changers in the temple because they were manipulating the currency to steal money from the people. The private banks are just like the money changers in Matthew 21. They are defrauding and robbing the people of Canada, thus their freedom, and they need to be stopped.
Yeah, and I think that the story of Jesus driving the money changers out of the temple is something that was taking place during the fourth turning as well. This seems to be the case that every time a prophet generational archetype reaches peak institutional power, that's what they do, is they soak up the wealth from all the other generations and resign us to some form of serfdom. And that's basically what we see happening right now is this poor girl is probably going to spend most of her life trying to pay the debt that they racked up. So, and Darlene is saying, smart young girl. And yeah, I'm going to send some well wishes out to Cindy here. I understand that she's actually at an MRI appointment right now. And she was just commenting there a minute ago at hospital for an MRI. We'll hopefully be back before the end of the stream. You can definitely catch the replay later there, Cindy. I appreciate you always being here, and I hope everything's okay. And many of the other people in the comments here, I see them wishing Cindy well. So it's a pretty great group that we have around here, I must say. It's more like a movement than a following, I find. So yeah, I appreciate everybody. So all right, here's the Canadians Broadcasting Communism, and the title is Polyev Ally Calls Trudeau one of the most successful politicians of his generation. So this is John Baird. Apparently, he gave a speech there recently where he talked about Trudeau as being one of the most successful politicians of his generation. Now, if you're measuring success on cleaving to power, then perhaps, yeah, you could call that some success. But as a leader, in terms of getting things done, like what has he done? Legalize weed? Even then, they barely got it through in time for his re-election. Anyway, John Baird, get your head out of your ass. Here is the article. Former cabinet minister John Baird introduced Trudeau at a conference held for Australian and Canadian leaders. One of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's most prominent supporters praised Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's political leadership during a conference on Tuesday. Trudeau was delivering an address at the Australian-Canadian Economic Leadership Forum in Toronto. He was introduced by former Conservative Cabinet Minister John Baird, who currently serves as one of the forum's Canadian co-chairs. I think this is a pretty clear indication of how, it is controlled opposition, and, all of these guys are kind of in bed together. We saw recently Brian Mulroney coming out and talking about how Trudeau's going to go down in history as one of the greatest Canadian prime ministers for his stalwart leadership during the pandemic. Yeah, okay. The Laurentian elitists are, all in it together, I think. And it's just quite the incestuous group that we have purportedly leading the country right now. All right. Trudeau is delivering an address. Oh, I think I read that. Okay. Last year, Baird was quick to endorse Poilievre when he announced his bid for conservative leadership. He also served as a national co-chair of Poilievre's successful campaign for the top Tory job. But Baird praised Trudeau's political acumen when he introduced the prime minister on Monday. Quote, "It's my great privilege to introduce one of the most successful political leaders of our generation," close quote, Baird said before Trudeau came to the podium to speak. Baird left politics just before the 2015 election that brought Trudeau's Liberals to power. Baird balanced his praise of the prime minister with a joke indicating his political allegiance hasn't changed. The former foreign affairs minister told the audience a story about visiting the Philippines shortly after Trudeau attended a summit in that country. Baird said that while he was getting a ride to the airport, he told the driver he was from Canada. Quote, "We'd love Canada. We love your prime minister," close quote, Baird recalled the driver saying in response. Quote, "I smiled, I paused, and I said, why?" Trudeau thanked Baird for his work at the forum, adding that different political perspectives are important when promoting Canada on the world stage. Later in his speech, Trudeau took a shot at Poilievre without naming the Conservative leader. Speaking about the public concerns about the rising cost of living, Trudeau said some leaders want to, quote unquote, exploit those concerns for political gain. Give me a break. And I noticed that they're cutting out, because I went and I watched the video, and the answer, like, where's the answer? Why do you support Trudeau? So I don't see that here in the article. I believe the answer was something like, you know, his charisma and his hair. So I don't. They didn't really round that one out, did they? Way to go, commie bastards. All right. So speaking about the public concerns about rising costs of living, Trudeau said some leaders want to exploit those concerns for political gain. Quote, "Unfortunately, there are those who want to exploit it with without real solutions to ease people's economic anxieties," close quote, Trudeau said. Confession through projection. Quote, "They say everything is broken and they talk about burning it all down," close quote, he added, referring to one of Poilievre's repeated criticisms about the Liberal government. I don't think he said he wanted to burn it all down. He said Canada is broken, and then he couched that later. He capitulated to the Liberal press's pressures, and now he says that Canada feels broken. Well, I mean, it is broken. You should stick to your guns there, Paper Tiger. The Canada-Australia Economic Leadership Forum bills itself as a way for political and business leaders from both countries to discuss economic and policy issues. Ontario Premier Slug Ford and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe are also scheduled to speak during the 3-day event. All right, so there you go. Straight out of Canadians broadcasting communism. And then John Baird comes out with this. He says, "The Liberal Party's publicly funded spin machine is back at it. Political success does not equate to competent leadership of Canada. Will be the next prime minister. Pierre Poilievre will be the next prime minister of Canada and end 8 years of Liberal waste, corruption, and incompetence." So I don't know how you didn't see that one coming there, Johnny. The fact of the matter is, like, you called him a successful leader, one of the most successful politicians, I guess. So, yeah, if you're talking about cleaving to power, that's not a good thing. You shouldn't be praising that. And, you know, it's just remarkable to me that he would even say that to begin with at a time like this. So, all right, here is Scott Nugent. What was that? Oh, yeah, okay. So it looks like only people who follow John Baird can even reply to that. Here is Scott Nugent, and he says, "Military general now publicly pushing for the little kids to medically transition." That's a mistake. This isn't a military general. This person is an admiral, but it's a position of the Health and Human Services department there in the United States. This is not a game. It's not political. It's not subject to gain, fame, and money. We are butchering kids. Every timeline I hit, I'm trans, give me the keys, give me the mic now, and get out of my way. Scream louder, stop transing kids. Okay, so here is a quick clip of...
What would you say to folks who think that they're being reasonable by saying, why can't children just wait till they're 18?
Adolescence is hard and puberty is hard. What if you're going through the wrong puberty? What if you inside feel that you are female?
What would you say to folks who think that they're being reasonable by saying...
Evil. Sick, evil stuff. Okay. Here's You Can't Fix Stupid, and they're tweeting, it's called brainwashing. They're doing it, and they're admittedly coming for our kids. Hashtag liberal corruption. Liberalism is a mental disease. Hashtag groomers. So I'll play a little bit of this. This is undercover video exposes teachers planning on how to push gender ideology.
Nearly 200 educators, administrators, and students across New York State attended. There, they broke out into classrooms and discussed how to strategically incorporate gender-based ideology into lesson planning. Here's special education teacher Cynthia Clough from the Albany School District.
You can just be, I don't want to use the word insidious. The word I want to use is just quietly disruptive. You know, as a classroom teacher in your buildings, you put your little rainbow sticker up. I'm not saying everybody come out and be like, ooh, guess what? You don't have to do all that. You can just do it on a quiet a book you read, the language you use in your classroom, the opening of your kids' minds to other opportunities, to other pathways, to just letting your kids know that your classroom is a safe space. Even those things, I mean, you could read, Johnny Has Two Mommies if you want to. You could read on the book reading day, it's like February 2nd, you could read the jazz story, or have, your drag queens come in and read the jazz story if you want to. Or you could just quietly read books. Don't even bring attention to them. If you're writing a math sheet, write a math sheet and put a picture of someone on there who's like, a non-binary, maybe looking kind of person.
That's Michael Smith, a world languages teacher of Long Island, one of Assistant Superintendent David Casamento's teachers who works in the East Meadow School District.
If I decide to come in with makeup and bigger shoulder pads, am I really doing drag? Am I just being me? Where does the line fall? So I think that introduction of it really be as simple as saying, hey, we're going to read a book from Dr. Seuss, and here's a quote from Martin Luther King, and here's a quote from RuPaul, and just having like little kind of drops of exposure throughout somebody's upbringing. I mean, that's what settles into our psyche as what normalcy is, right? More exposure. And people that have extreme culture shock are people that are isolated and aren't exposed to somebody who's different. You grow up in New York, and you see, you walk down the street, you see 74 different kinds of people all the time.
I remember the first time I went swimming after my top surgery. It was awesome. And I never swam before that. I never went to the beach. So there's things I would choose to not do in navigating my situation so that it felt most comfortable to me. And I was working very physical jobs at that time. I spent about 6 years saving up for my top surgery because it wasn't covered by health insurance back then, and binding and working physical jobs, saving money, traveling for surgery. I traveled to San Francisco.
Yeah, okay. So Michael Rousseau is over here saying, notice the language, your kids. They aren't your kids, period. They are your students. Great point. Thank you very much. And you'll notice this person is talking about top surgery. It's a double mastectomy that they're talking about here. But they dress it all up in this language that is pretty clearly targeted at children. They're trying to make it sound like it's cute and easy and stuff like this. And yeah, it's quite sickening, the medicalization of our children that's taking place. They're just grooming them to be sexually butchered into permanent medical patients to provide big pharma with livestock. It's big money, and there's this ideology behind it. And I'll point out again that in the fourth turning, that's when gender roles are at their narrowest. So over the course of the saeculum, hours starting after the last fourth turning, which would have been the Second World War, during the first turning, gender roles are at their widest. So that would have been the GI generation with breadwinners and housewives and traditional nuclear family. And then gender roles start to narrow during the second turning, which is the awakening, as the boomer generation comes out of the institutions and starts prosecuting the new spiritual awakening. And we saw like the hippie generation with long-haired men and things like that. And then during the third turning, Gender roles narrow more. And I, for example, got my ear pierced when I was 9. And basically got called a faggot for the rest of my childhood, but I never took it out. And then in the fourth turning, gender roles are at their narrowest. And what's essentially happening there is, so the political pendulum, the force of gravity that's exerted on the political pendulum that causes it to swing is changing demographics. And the gravitron particle that Einstein's theory predicts is daddy issues. And so the boomer generation currently at peak institutional power have daddy issues for the greatest generation who had broad traditional gender roles. And every generation sets out in the course of their early lives trying to course correct for what they perceive to be the excess wielding of their parents' midlife power. And so what we see happening here, in my assessment, is the boomers' attempt to course correct for traditional gender roles, and it is the eradication of gender. That's what's happening. So, and they're getting rich off it. Okay, and here is the dailymail.com, and they're reporting pink-haired Portland surgeon who performs sex change surgery on trans children admits they face lifetime of infertility, incontinence, and sexual dissatisfaction in now deleted video. The bullets here say horrified viewers likened the evil procedure to Nazi-era experiments. Advocates say they're rare but vital for those with serious body dysmorphia. We don't give liposuction to anorexics, so no. Read about OHSU's Dr. Death helping out-of-staters end their lives in Oregon. Excuse me. A surgeon dubbed Dr. Frankenstein has candidly revealed the downsides of performing genital reshaping surgeries on transgender children and adults in a video which has since been deleted. In the video, Dr. Blair Peters, a self-described queer surgeon with the he/they pronouns, pink hair, and a passion for genital surgeries, says patients face fertility, sexual pleasure, and other lifelong post-op complications. Perhaps more concerning is how Dr. Peters, who works at one of America's most progressive hospitals, presents his procedures, some of which involve robotics, as experimental. He says he's, quote, figuring out what works, close quote, and that his team will know more in the next, quote, 5 to 10 years, close quote, i.e., we're conducting experiments on children. Surgically altering male and female genitals to match those of the opposite sex, or simply removing patients' privates altogether, are widely understood to be tough and problematic procedures. So I'll play a little bit of this video here.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really, really appreciate it. Let's start with introductions. Could you please tell us your name and your pronouns?
Yeah, perfect. My name's Blair Peters. I use he and they pronouns, and I am a gender affirming surgeon located in Portland, Oregon at OHSU, or Oregon Health Science University.
Very cool. Could you tell us a little bit about, if you have a subspecialty, what it is, or maybe some examples of the most common procedures that you perform?
Yeah, definitely. So 80% or so of my practice is gender affirming surgery. So I do facial, chest surgery, and genital surgery. But the majority of my practice and sort of where my passion lies is really genital surgery cases. So I do a lot of vaginoplasty and a lot of phalloplasty.
That is amazing. When we spoke before, you mentioned these quote unquote non-binary procedures that you're seeing become a little more routine. Could you expand on how that might differ from what folks who have a little bit of context about gender affirming surgery, how that might be different?
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, I hope the field is changing. In a lot of ways, I think everyone grows up with, and especially in medical training, really internalizes this binary bias. And that really paints a lot of what the traditional procedures offered to people are. It's like on one end you have a vaginoplasty, and on the other end you have a phalloplasty. And every surgery has an inherent level of risk to it, and everyone's dysphoria comes from completely different places, especially in regards to their anatomy. So my whole approach to gender affirming surgery is not putting my own bias of what a binary genitalia should be onto someone. It's listening to them and figuring out, where is your dysphoria coming from? What can we fix with surgery? And what is the appropriate level of risk for you? And there's some people that come in and they embrace a non-binary.
Okay, I'm gagging a little bit as I listen to this guy, and I think everybody else is feeling the same way. Looking at the comments here, so if you want to go check that video out, you can do it yourself. It's just evil. It's sick, evil, nasty exploitation of children to boost those big pharma stocks. Okay, and here's Chloe Cole, and she's tweeting out, I started my battle against medically transitioning children over a year ago. The first state I shared my story with was Louisiana. Last year, Louisiana tried to ban talk therapy for kids with gender dysphoria. That's what happened with Bill C4 that all 338 MPs in Canada voted for. It's the ban on so-called conversion therapy, and they classify talk therapy for gender dysphoric kids as conversion therapy. You're not allowed to seek counseling for your gender dysphoric kid to try to help them feel comfortable in the body in which they were born. That's illegal in Canada. You have to go straight to the puberty blockers, hormone therapy leading to surgery. And looking at the statistics, as far as I've seen anyway, once they go on the hormones, they don't come back. They don't change their minds. So, okay, back to the tweet. As of today, Louisiana has done a full 180 and has now placed age restrictions that prevent what happened to me from happening to any child in the South. To the Louisiana legislature, thank you so much for listening to my cautionary tale. So these are what are being dubbed detransitioners. And I'm always trying to highlight their stories around here because like we see them, they're coming out now, they're reaching adulthood and they've been destroyed. And so they're coming out and sharing their stories. They have been trying for quite some time. They got banned from Reddit. Their subreddit was deleted. And it's really just kind of been since Elon Musk finally wrestled Twitter away from the boomer board of investors that we've been able to see these people's stories coming out publicly. So here is Chloe Cole.
My name is Chloe Cole, and I'm from the Central Valley of California and a former transgender child patient. I'm currently 17 years old and was medically transitioning from ages 13 to 16. After I came out to my parents as a transgender boy at 12, I consulted a pediatric therapist in July of 2017 and was diagnosed with dysphoria by a gender specialist the following month. The healthcare workers are trained to strictly follow the affirmative care system, even for child patients, in part because of California's conversion therapy ban. There was very little gatekeeping or other treatments suggested for my dysphoria. When my parents asked about the efficacy of hormonal, surgical, and otherwise affirming treatments in dysphoric children, their concerns were very quickly brushed aside by medical professionals. I didn't even know detransitioners existed until I was one. The only person who didn't affirm me was the first endocrinologist I met. He refused to put me on blockers, citing concerns for my cognitive development. However, it was easy to see another endocrinologist to get a prescription for blockers and testosterone, just like getting a second opinion for any other medical concern. After only 2 or 3 appointments with the second endocrinologist, I was given paperwork and consent forms for puberty blockers, Lupron, and androgens that depot testosterone, respectively. I began blockers in February 2018, and 1 month later, I received my first testosterone shot. I received Lupron shots for about a year. After 2 years on testosterone, I expressed to my therapist that I was seeking.
So there you go. And that is the model that we have in Canada right now since the passage of Bill C-16, which was basically the first piece of legislation that the Liberals rammed through that brought gender identity and gender expression under the Canadian Human Rights Act as prohibited grounds for discrimination. And the medical system, in response to that, adopted the affirmative care model. Legal age of consent for the puberty blockers, hormone therapy leading to gender transition in Ontario, for example, is 12. And it's illegal to seek counseling for your gender dysphoric child in Canada. They'll throw those parents in jail. They really want to boost those Lupron stocks, that's for sure. Okay, I'm about to drop off the YouTube stream, guys, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the sciencey science, And not too much though. I'm trying not to cut you guys out completely, but please follow us over on Rumble. But before I go, I'm going to let you guys. I'm going to direct you to the Veterans for Freedom website, and here is the V4F Support Fund. The Veterans for Freedom Support Fund. This is to help Canadians who are suffering under this tyranny. Last month's donations, everybody gets to vote. Everybody who contributes gets to vote on where the funds go. Last month's donations went to saving the life of Sheila Annette Lewis, who needs a double lung transplant, and has been denied by AHS. But I think there's an update on that, actually. Shoot, I meant to tee that up. But I think she's actually going to be able to work something out now. So that's great. Yeah, I'll make sure I get that in there tomorrow. I got to do an update on Sheila and maybe see if she wants to come back for another interview. So this is the support fund. You can donate to this. This goes to helping Canadians. There is also, you can donate to Veterans for Freedom as well to help us keep the lights on around here, pay for my StreamYard account, that kind of thing. And but this one is for Canadians, not for Veterans for Freedom. And you can just click on one of these buttons here to sign up for a subscription with your credit card, anywhere from $5 to $1,000 a month. Please give generously, whatever you're able to. And if, like, just $5, hopefully for anybody. I know a lot of people are pretty strapped right now, and that's by design. And if you don't want to use a credit card, you can set up transfer to go to fund@veteransforfreedom.ca. That's fund@veterans4freedom.ca. Try to auto deposit enabled, preferably, but if you're not able to do that, then please use the password fund4freedom. And it's all going towards helping Canadians. Okay, so this is the part of the show where I'm going to drop off the YouTube stream, but please follow us over here at rumble.com, Veterans for Freedom. And with that, I will bid you adieu, YouTube censorship platform, you commie bastards.